In 5, 4, 3,
That's all I needed.
2.
What's up? It's Whiskeyish Wednesday with me, Paul. As you may have noticed, Trey's not here. And I don't have a guest today either. You're just stuck with me. So yeah, Trey and I decided we wanted to do things a little bit differently. He got really busy, and instead of recording a different day, we're like, onward and upward and onward. So here you're stuck with me today, and we're gonna do things a little bit different. Trey and I actually have been talking about doing something like this. We're just gonna monologue, or as I would say, rant. We're just gonna pick a topic, and it's just gonna be us. So it's kind of fun, Trey's not here to interrupt me, so here we go. So yeah, today I wanted to talk about language. What is it? But in particular, I wanted to talk about Christianese and how that can be. First off, what is it? Second, it can be kind of dangerous. I think it can be a dangerous thing. But I think it's interesting. I wanted to talk about language first, and just it's funny with just how language changes. It's one of those things that we all know it happens, and we hate it every time. It's funny because we think about even the way that that I speak currently, the millennial generation speaks, is different than how like a Gen Xer would speak, or how a Gen Z would speak, or how a baby boomer would speak. And each one is mad at the other for not speaking the way that they would want you to, which is the way that they grew up speaking. And it's kind of funny because I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think that the fact that language changes, I think that's a good thing, because that shows an evolution of language. It shows that the language is being used creatively, and that it's being continually being invented upon, and that outdated language or language words get retired, and so we stop using those. We create new ones. I think sometimes it can be negative things, where there's like a really good word that we just don't use anymore. But we don't use it anymore, so we'll create a new one for it. So it's funny. It's like I don't think we should look at people language changing and just be like, oh, those kids. It's just be like, it changed. And it's funny because it doesn't even take that long for it to change. I think about, even for myself, words that I would use as a kid don't mean what they mean now. And so it's interesting. It's hard. It's difficult sometimes, because it's like, well, I spent the majority of my life thinking this word meant this, and you went and changed it on me. So now I gotta relearn it. It's like how to fly an airplane, and then all of a sudden someone like changes the layout. I don't know why I picked an airplane. And then you walk in, you're just like, the heck? Like, the steering wheel. They have steering. The thingy that used to go up and down is over here. It used to be over there, and what are you gonna do? So that, I think that's kind of I don't even know what that was about. But I will let you know, today I'm drinking brandy, and there's not a lot in there. I'm gonna pour some more. A little pregame, I guess. I was just light on my pour, and I remedied that real quick. But this is Saint Remy. It's a VSOP. Saint Remy. This is a $10 bottle of brandy that I bought at the liquor store because it was cheap and it had a pretty bottle. I like the crest on it. I think the crests are cool. But it's interesting. So this is French brandy. It's a VSOP. Very special old pale, I think. I'm going to go with that. It's a weird rating system they have with these things. Don't quite understand it. But yeah, I don't really understand it. But I thought it was interesting. I brought it in because it was French. And I thought it was interesting because French is an interesting language. But I think at one point, weren't they trying to make it the universal language? And then it just wasn't. I don't know how that worked. I'm not an English language major. English is every language. So, yeah, but I think it's funny how people look at changing language as language getting worse, but really it's just language changing. um, because the way that, let's say baby boomers, they look at us and say, millennials, us, and be like, you guys are ruining language. And then the generation before them, or a couple generations before them, is like, you baby boomers are ruining language. Because they're the ones who are just like, bad means good now. What are you going to do? So those are the kinds of things that it's funny, the double standard with that. Because it's funny, I feel like I'm caught in the middle here because there's a generation below me that's yeeting everything, and I just learned what that word meant like a month ago. So, to be fair, it was like 2 years ago I learned. A year ago, it wasn't that long ago. It wasn't that long ago. I guess I'm really old now. But it's interesting because we look at the language before us and whatever period you're in, and we look at that as like that is the quintessential proper English. But then you go a little bit more before then, you're like, I don't understand what these people are talking about. Have you ever tried to read a King James Bible? Most of the time it's like, I don't even know what thy or thine or them or I know what them means, but it's like I don't even know what some of these words mean. Like I could guess, but like I'm really guessing based on the context clues. But I think that's what's interesting with language is like there's still enough of it there that you can choose on the context around it. But we look back at like when people came over in like the 1700s, we're like, what are these people talking about? Like, I don't know what this is. Have you seen their spelling? It's horrendous. I think, wasn't it Noah Webster who like, I guess, regulated with the dictionary? He was just like, this is how you spell this word now. And he kind of changed some things, and like we just got what he got. So we're just like, he's just like, here's a book with words in it, and that's how you spell it now. And we're like, oh, cool, right on. We just kind of went for it. But so it's fascinating because if we were to compare the languages of the 1700s to now the 2000s, we wouldn't be able to understand each other. It's funny, even we talk about it with slang, where it's like you go over to England and it's like, oh, some of the slang that we use they've never heard of before. They have no idea what it means, and vice versa. They're talking about stuff. Go to Australia. Like, what are these people even saying? Those aren't even words. It's just because it's like it's the same language, but it's a different language. So where am I going at with this? Well, we look at it because in a sense we've created a culture. Obviously, Australia has a different culture than America, the United States does. The culture is different. And then you break it down even from there. Inside of the U.S., we have different cultures based on which state you're from, even which part of the state you're from. Yeah, so I'm from Ohio, from Northeast Ohio, and people in Southern Ohio, it's like they're a little bit different. Some of the things might be very similar, but the way they communicate, the way they say things is a little bit different. The one that's funny is someone's like, "Oh yeah, I seen that." It's what I even near me there's like a certain city. It was like everyone from that city, that township, they all said "seen." It's like, what? No, that's not how you talk. So I'm the only one here like, "Ugh." But then it's funny because then I come down here and I say the word. I'm in Florida now. I say the word pop. Down here, they don't say that, and they laugh at me for calling it pop. So I'm over here like, yeah, I'll have a pop. They're like, what are you talking about? Do you mean Coke? I think, do they say Coke here or soda? I think they say Coke. It's Coca-Cola. I think that's what they say. But even with that, it's like there's this breakdown of language now because I say pop, and that just means any sugary fizzy drink. And then here, Coke means every fizzy sugary drink. And to me, that's one specific type of pop. So it's weird. It's like it's a strange concept where it's like we live in the same country, we speak the same language, but we don't. And so it's even to break that even further into like you know different group event or groups. You have like surfers. They have a way of speaking that is unique to them. They have their own lingo. People who are in computers have their own way of talking. For most people, it's like, oh, the computer guy walks in, he's like, oh, yes, your motherboard and blah, 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 and the CPU and the fry and blah, blah. It's like, what are you talking about? Most people listen to that and like, those aren't words. But then to sound smart, they'll try to use one of those, and everyone who isn't computers is like, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. And so it's the same thing with surfers. Someone's like, oh yeah, it's gonna catch that sick Narna. People say that anymore? I hope not. It's like, oh yeah, let's go catch a wave. And that one doesn't really work. I don't know how surfers talk. But it's like there are things that they say that the average person has no idea what they're talking about, or they hear it and they're like, they sound stupid. It's funny because you just have that like, oh yeah, bruh, and it's like, yeah, it sounds pretty dumb. But then to them, they could be talking something like, no, that guy's a genius. He knows exactly what he's talking about. So it's funny how we see that inside different cultures of just the usage of language and just new words or the way that words are used. One of the funny things to take a step out of that a little bit is for how words have changed is this one makes me laugh every time thinking of the word awful. So to us now, if I'm like, oh yeah, this is, I'm sorry, I like this brandy, but it's like, hey, this is awful. Someone's like, how dare you? This is a good brandy. I enjoy it. And it's like, nah, it's awful. Well, if you go back, however, I don't know, it's a couple hundred years, I'm sure, but however long ago it was, like we look at the root of it, awful, awe. It's like, something that is awesome or awe-inspiring. Something that leaves you in a state of awe, something that's worthy of awe. It's like, oh, it's something that is miraculous or something that is just like incredible. It's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So however many 100 years ago you have to go back, the word meant something worthy of awe. So you could be like, this brandy is awful. And someone would be like, thank you so much. Here's my painting. It's awful. Thank you. That's the highest compliment I could ever get. And it makes me laugh every time. Because it's like, yeah, if someone said it was awful, it's just like, it means it's terrible. So it's funny, it's like, I don't even know how that changed. How did that word change? Did someday someone's just like, oh yeah, that painting, that's awful. Someone's like, thank you. He's like, not a compliment. And then they just kind of went with it. I'm interested. I don't know how words change like that. I know it happens over time, but I feel like there's a pinnacle moment where someone just kind of reused it. Maybe it was a joke and the joke just kind of stuck. I don't know. If you know, please let me know. I'm actually really interested in this. But yeah, so I'll say this now too. So I don't consider myself a word nerd. I grew up in a family of English majors and teachers, and by osmosis, I guess I just learned a little bit. Enough that I get mad when people say, or people write apple. It's like, no, it's an apple. That is not how you write that. Or when people mix up there, and there. It's like, or is an R. I don't like when people do that. It's like, it's so easy, but it's because I know it. That's why it's easy for me. Even then, I still mess it up. But all that to say, I'm not a word expert. I don't know what I just know a little bit. Enough to make me angry sometimes and decide to rant about it. But I want to dive into a little bit now that we're like 15 minutes into this thing about Christianese. And so what I've talked about before, it really translates into this as far as we look at all the different cultures and how it, in a sense, it alienates people. It also shows the people inside of that group, it shows them a sense of belonging, where if we'll go back to the surfer example. If you know how to speak surfer, surfer English, then it's like, yeah, you are part of that group. People can listen to you and say, "Oh, I'm recognizing the fact that we are in the same group. We understand each other." And so if someone goes in, like with the computer example, if someone comes in and was like, "Oh yes, your circuit board is on the motherboard, and your motherboard is a Wi-Fi," it's like everyone's like, "Yeah, you're not part of the group." Yeah, you never went to school, did you? Sorry for people who don't know it. Yeah, whatever. But so it's funny with that. It's not funny because dang it, it's not funny in the sense of how it translates into the Christian culture. Because we really have. I say weeks. I'm part of this as well. I'm part of the problem because I'm guilty of using Christianese. And if you don't know what that is, I'll explain it really quick. It's those words and phrases that only Christians really understand, but I'm going to continue to argue they don't understand. So it's things like, oh yeah, dude, you just got to give it up to God. Yeah, just trust God. Yeah, dude, I'm really, I need some God's grace right now. Oh yeah, man, I just need to love on you. Who you fellowshipping with these days? It's like, these are things that no normal person would say because it doesn't mean anything. And so that's part of it where we look at that and we say like these things, they're things to explain a concept. They're words that we've created to explain a concept. It's like with this thing. It's like, what is this thing? How do I describe the essence of this thing? And one day someone's like, cup. Yeah, I don't know how they came up with that one. Some of them make sense to me, like fireplace. Like, oh yeah, the place where there's fire. Got it. Duffel bag. So I can understand the person who's walking around like, oh yeah, fireplace. Yeah, that guy's a thinker. He put it together. Then someone else is just like, duffel bag? What the heck? Yeah, he likes to eat those mushrooms over there. But yeah, so it's like they're words we've invented or used to explain a concept. And so, but the problem that we have now is that no one understands what the concept is, and second of all, you don't understand what the concept is. It makes me laugh because just recently someone asked me, like, how do you explain God's grace? And it took me a minute to be like, grace, God's grace. Yeah, it's a good thing, right? It's He shows it. It took me a minute to really think about like, what does that actually mean? And that's been like an off and on thing for me for a while. Where I remember there was one moment in particular, someone was talking to me, and I was asking for some help on something. He was like, you just got to give it up to God. And I was like, that doesn't mean anything. Like, what are you talking about? And it's like those are things that we say that we mean them genuinely, but we don't know what we mean genuinely. And even then, it's like since the concept itself, the definition is so I guess so muddy for a lot of people, we don't even know how to use it necessarily. And so the danger in that, one of the dangers in that is that we don't use it properly. So when we talk about God's goodness, if we don't truly understand what God's goodness is, what that means, then we can use it inappropriately a lot of times, or we can teach it to others wrongly, and then they can continue to learn it wrongly. And so it's like that's where it's like, yeah, you need to pray to God and ask for the Holy Spirit to help disciple you and teach you the meanings of these words. What is this concept? And go through Scripture. what does Scripture say that these mean? How does it talk about these things? You're not going to open it up and just be like, let me go to the appendix in the back, even though actually you could probably find that in some Bibles. But I think those are really important things for us to go back to and really try to understand for ourselves, because, for example, God's goodness. It's like we don't understand that. We don't really understand who God is. We don't really understand, to the best that we can as finite human beings. We don't really even understand our place in front of Him, like where is our position with Him. So those are really important things that I would challenge and encourage you to spend time with. That's what I try to do. I'm not good about it all the time. I'm trying to get better about it. But it's like, let's stop and think about, what does this mean? And on top of that too, thank you for walking in. I'm over here in a room by myself talking like a maniac. Someone finally walked in. I was like, oh, a person? But so I was going to say, on top of that, the second danger that I really feel is that, just like we have the computer guys, or we have the surfer guys, and they have their own language, and they can tell who's not in the group. They're like, okay, you're not part of the group, so bye. That happens to non-Christians or people who don't know the Christian language. And it's because, and so what happens is we find that culture, that tribalism even, and we say, oh, I understand what this word means, so I'm part of the group. You over here, someone's like, oh yeah, dude, just love on them. You're like, what are you talking about? Oh, you're not part of the group, are you? You're not a Christian, huh? And so what can happen is like an isolation. So then we can often push people away. It's like, well, they don't even understand what fellowship means, so I'm not going to invite them over. and so there's two things. One, I feel like there's a problem we have with discipleship. We don't teach people, this is what this means. This is what this concept is behind this word. And second of all, we use it knowing that people don't know what it means. I'm guilty of using it sometimes subconsciously, sometimes consciously, but it's because that's just how I've taught, growing up in a Christian church. But I think it's important to first, like I said, understand what does this mean? What are we talking about? Like the one that makes me laugh is just, oh, I just want to love on you. It's like, gross. But it's like, that means something very specific to Christians. That means something completely different to everyone else. And so I think we need to be careful to make sure we're not creating this culture to isolate other people, or that we're using words that we actually understand too, and concepts that we understand. Because there's that big danger. The one, it was funny. I'll close on this because I've been ranting for a while here. Just last week, I was having a conversation with a few people, and we started really disagreeing with each other, but only because the word we were using was being defined two completely different ways. So the word was manipulation, and the people I was talking to watched it. So thank you for watching, and you made it in. Unless Annie cuts this. But yeah, so the way I was defining manipulation, which I would argue is the right definition, was one way, and they were defining it a completely different way and using it very differently than I've always understood this word to mean. And so that was finally called out. I was like, hey, wait, we don't agree on the definition of this word. So it was funny. So then I felt like a lot of the disagreement happened over this word and not because of what we were talking about. So in a sense, it broke down the conversation to a point where it was hard to continue. And just like the language itself caused a disagreement that didn't need to even happen. But a lot of it was because we should have gone back from the beginning and said, whoa, what are you talking about? I don't really understand what you mean. My brother's great about this. One of his classic phrases is, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And it's great because it forces you to really try to define, instead of using these really kind of vague, meaningless terms, to really be like, oh, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I mean. Another thing that I've heard some people say and I really like is this is okay. So what I heard you say was blah blah blah, or this is how I heard you say, and that's great because it's like you're kind of putting it on yourself instead of attacking somebody else and saying, I really want to understand what you're trying to say. We talked about this on a Whiskey Wednesday episode, which is that Stephen Covey quote, which was people don't often listen with the intent to understand, listen with the intent to reply, and that's really what it is. When you ask someone, how are you defining that term? Well, I don't really understand what you're saying. I think this is what I heard you say, stuff like that. You're saying, I really want to understand what you're talking about, because we can often, two people like in the example I just gave, can use the same word, but it means two completely different things. Like we even said with the word awful, talk to George Washington. It means something different to him than it does to me. He's walking around like, wow, this building is awful. I'm like, how dare you, sir? And he's trying to compliment us. So I think that's where, I'm just want to come back to that as I close here. Let's really, I think the challenge here is let's really understand language. Let's really understand what we're talking about. And let's not use language intentionally or unintentionally to alienate or try to push people out of a group, but let's invite them in and say, hey, this is what I'm talking about. I said God's grace, but this is what that means. I think when we spend time doing that, we've entered into an amazing thing called discipleship, which I think is a beautiful thing that we need to spend more time on. But yeah, that's a rant for another time. So here I am going way over time. I was expecting to do this in 15, and here we are at almost 30. Well, hey, thank you so much to Maximize Digital Media and Annie Yulee for producing this episode, and Trey for not interrupting me, even though I can just hear him in the back of my mind going like, oh boy. Well, thank you so much. I hope you guys appreciate this. Hope you learned something. I hope it was encouraging or challenging to you as it was for me, hearing myself ramble on and on like a madman in a room by myself. And check us out on Instagram. We just created one. It's tipsy_theology. Follow us on there. We post updates. We post some stuff about, we're going to be posting more about what we're doing, what are the haps. DM us, leave us a comment, leave us a like. We appreciate all those. Leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. Leave us a comment or subscribe to us on YouTube. And I'm out of breath after all of that. And we'll catch you guys on the next one.